Hello, welcome back to the Life from Nurse podcast. Hope you all are doing all right. As always, we're going to discuss a few things that have happened in the last week in the world of watches. What's really exciting about this week is it seems like all the auction houses are sort of announcing the watches that they are going to be selling in Geneva, which is always an exciting time and a fun period for us to see what's kind of going to come up on the auction block this next season. Obviously, there are also some new watch releases that came out, so I'm going to talk about a couple of things over the next 10 to 20 minutes here. So one of the things that showed up on Instagram, and I'm sure that you saw this piece, was the Montblanc and Collective Horology collaboration for the 1858 Minerva Mono Pusher Chronograph P05 Blue Arrow. So Collective Horology is a California-based watch club founded in 2018 by Asher Rapkin and Gabe Riley, and they've done a lot of collaborations with brands that come out with specific watches, and this time they're coming out with their 8th limited edition with Montblanc, which is named the Blue Arrow. The way that this watch sort of came about was actually from a vintage Minerva stopwatch known as the Yacht Timer, which was sold by Eric Wind, who I'm sure you are familiar with. Collective Horology was sort of inspired by this this piece and basically came out with this new watch, which was based on the Montblanc 1858 Minerva Mono Pusher Chronograph Red Arrow, which was limited to 88 pieces, that was launched in 2022. This is a stainless steel cased watch with white gold fluted bezels. That's the same as the original from 2022, but this time has this new dial color that is obviously sort of this blue that's sort of put into the telemeter scale that you see on the dial of the watch. What's really exciting about this piece is it really does bring to life the pocket watch that Eric Wind did offer, and I think Minerva is obviously, for vintage lovers, really well respected and desired by many vintage watch collectors, and so it's a cool watch. I think it's a great collaboration between Minerva and Montblanc. The movement really does look quite beautiful. If you haven't seen pictures, I would highly recommend that you take a look at it. I think this watch is obviously catering to those vintage watch enthusiasts who are looking for a modern piece, and this is a wonderful piece to pick up. However, it's only going to be made in 30 examples, so if they haven't already been sold out, I recommend seeing if you can get one, but I highly doubt that there will be any available. But it's a nice sort of nod to that pocket watch. I'm shifting gears a little bit here, and I wanted to talk about the Horological Society of New York. They had their October event where they actually had Willem Schmidt, who is the CEO of A. Lange & Söhne, talk about A. Lange & Söhne, and the symposium was titled Its Very Own Way of Watchmaking. Willem Schmidt, if you don't know, is the CEO of A. Lange & Söhne, and during his talk he gave a really great overview of the brand, its history, how important it is to the area of Germany and Glashütte, and he goes through actually all of the lines that they have released, and also talks about A. Lange & Söhne from a business perspective during his talk. If you are a member of the Horological Society of New York but were not able to go to the actual talk, I highly recommend you check out his lecture. And if you aren't part of the Horological Society of New York, go to their YouTube channel, because the talk will be uploaded there shortly. I think it's 3 months afterwards. But I would highly recommend watching it, because it gives a great overview of a brand that really deserves it. I think if you went back maybe 5 to 7 years, I think A. Lange & Söhne was really getting a lot of mainstream watch media coverage. I think they still are, but not to the extent that maybe they were, because there are other things that are being spoken about. What I love about A. Lange & Söhne is, no matter the piece that you're getting, you know that the quality is at the highest level. If you compare one of their most expensive pieces with one of their most inexpensive pieces, you're still going to find the same type of finishing, which is finishing, construction, all of it, which I think is it makes A. Lange & Söhne stand out compared to other brands. So check out the talk. I'll leave a link in the show notes for you to see it. Another release that actually came out just a couple of days before, or maybe a day before this podcast is going to be released, was the Louis Vuitton collaboration with Rexhepi for the LVRR-01 Chronographe et à sonnerie. This is the first collaboration that Louis Vuitton and Acrivia are doing together, and they've built something quite spectacular. So the watch has 2 dials, one on each side of the watch. The front side has a tinted sapphire dial, which is signed Acrivia, and allows you to actually see a really great image of the watch parts. It also obviously has your time display on that side. If you flip the watch over, what you'll end up seeing is a double-faced chronograph with chiming complication, and runs on a new tourbillon movement that was developed from scratch by Rexhepi, and was put into the Louis Vuitton tambour case. It's got 6 gold cubes on one of the side. It's got a really beautiful enamel dial on the other side, and Grand Feu enamel dial that has obviously speaks to sort of the tradition of Louis Vuitton, some of the pieces that they've made. This watch is, it is a collaboration between 2 very, very important brands. Acrivia is really getting a lot of great, well-deserved press, which is really exciting. And it kind of shows the different, you have sort of this modern side, but you also have a traditional side, both in the way that the watch is constructed and also the design cues that the 2 faces really come in. It comes in this really cool Louis Vuitton printed box, which I thought was quite cool. The pictures are really interesting. There's only going to be 10 of them available. They're probably already all sold. But it was a cool collaboration. Some people will obviously question it, maybe not to everyone's taste, but I think it's a really phenomenal display of watchmaking between this a giant of Louis Vuitton and Rexhepi, who's one of the best independent watchmakers. There was also some pretty awesome news. I think talking watches is probably a staple of the watch community. No matter who you are, I think if you're into watches, you've probably watched at least one episode of Talking Watches, and Hodinkee announced that they're going to be publishing the 80th episode of Talking Watches this next week. I believe it's going to be released actually the day, 2 days after this podcast is released, and there is a surprise guest that is going to be there. It's so much of a surprise that they're actually having a live viewing of the episode, which is quite exciting. There will be a cocktail hour and a screening of it, which is quite cool. I think they got a lot of interest in it, and it's kind of exciting that they're building it up like this. Obviously, everyone is wondering who the guest is going to be. If I'm honest, I think the guest is going to be Eric Clapton. That's just my... to build such a big event, around this, there's no way that they're not bringing on someone like that. So I Yeah, that's my guess. Eric Clapton. Another thing in the news was Longines released their Spirit Flyback chronograph in titanium. Previously, this watch was not made in titanium. They are now making it in titanium. I do think that Longines is a brand that I speak about frequently, and from a vintage perspective, I think they deserve as much credit as one can give them. In the modern world, they are doing very good things with a lot of the watches that they're releasing, but they are catering to a lot more people with their brand, and so there are levels, I think, to Longines is what I'm sort of trying to describe. The this flyback chronograph, I think, was one of the coolest pieces that they had. It is on the larger side at 42 millimeters, but I do think that a flyback chronograph from a brand like this is quite interesting, an interesting release, especially considering the price point that you can get this really cool chronograph for. It is an ETA-based movement they have, but it is a column wheel chronograph movement that has a flyback functionality. And all of that for, around $5,000 is an attractive price point. And to do it in titanium, I think, is also sort of doubling down on the idea that this is a staple for Longines. And I like it. I look at very much. Titanium is a great metal to do this in, and adds to the sort of sporty element. The last thing I wanted to touch on was just a little bit of auction news. I know I've spoken a lot about the auction houses in these podcasts. I know last week I spoke about them quite heavily, but I wanted to speak about two watches that were announced to be sold at Sotheby's, which was basically two pieces, one made by George Daniels, one made by Roger Smith. They are two watches that have been described as being sort of tied together by history and the friendship between the two individuals. It's the last George Daniels Millennium watch and the very first coaxial anniversary watch, which has Daniels' name made by his apprentice and disciple Roger Smith, which this is an interesting sort of pairing. It does mark sort of the end of one incredible watchmaker and the beginning of another incredible watchmaker, both being sold at Sotheby's, which is obviously incredibly important. The Millennium watch in white gold is expected to go for in excess of 1 million Swiss francs, and the coaxial anniversary in yellow gold is expected to go for in excess of 500,000 Swiss francs. I'd say that there are going to be many collectors who are probably going to want to try and buy both of these watches, as they do mark a pretty important lineage between the two watchmakers and also British watchmaking. So there was, obviously a record sale at Phillips this year with the Smith's pocket watch number 2 setting the record for a British watch at 4.9 million Swiss franc US dollars. So we'll see what these watches end up going for. I do think being in Geneva, it's a great stage for these incredible pieces, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did pretty well. Now, I know that there are probably some people out there saying this story is just being made up about these two pieces being tied together. Sure, but it is a story nonetheless, and it is a story that I think is going to be important to collectors, especially those who collect British watches, British watch-making watches, and the like. So, exciting little bit of auction news there as well. So, that just about does it. I'm going to wrap up the podcast here. I want to give you a little bit of news. Next week, we will we'll talk a little bit about a couple new watches that we're going to be getting in. Pretty exciting to get into those pieces with you guys. We'll also have a video, obviously, where we'll talk about those pieces briefly on our YouTube channel, just to give you a little bit of a taster of the watches that are going to be reviewed in the coming weeks. There is some pretty cool diversity in this collection, both in era, both in design, which I think is quite exciting. So I'm looking forward to those videos to come out, and doing some research on these pieces that have really incredible stories, and that is what's really exciting. Anyway, I think that just about does it for this episode of the Life of the Wrist podcast. Be sure to follow this podcast, and if you are feeling generous and wouldn't mind rating it, it really does help this podcast get ranked nicely on the podcast platforms that you are listening to this podcast on. Check out all the links in the show notes if you want to see some of the articles about the things that we spoke about in this podcast, and you can also check out all of our sites. There will all be in the show notes. With this said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and I will catch you in the next one.